Mahalo to the following sponsors: Haiku Helen, psychic extraordinaire and internet promoter, haikuhelen.com, and The Salon in Paia, where beauty meets the beach, hairstyling, and much more. Welcome to Life on Maui. My name is Stephen Freid. My guest for today is Jacob Liberman, author of the bestseller Take Off Your Glasses and See, and more recently, Wisdom from an Empty Mind. Much of his life is devoted to vision in the larger sense. Welcome to the show, Jacob.
It's nice to be here. Good to see you.
Good to see you, yeah. So, what prompted you to write Take Off Your Glasses and See?
You know, I was classically trained as an optometrist and spent many of my years working as a vision scientist as well.
What's a vision scientist?
Well, it's not a clinician. It's someone that is using research and so on to take a look at aspects of science that have to do with the functioning of vision. So it's not just examining the eyes, looking at prescriptions, training vision, and so on, but it's looking at other phenomena that play a role in the process of vision, looking a lot, for instance, at neurophysiological functioning of the eye. So looking at the brain as well as the eyes, because the eyes are actually not separate from the brain. They're frontal extensions of the brain. So if you looked at the brain, it has two frontal satellite dishes, which are your direct connection with the world. 90% of everything that we take in during our lifetime occurs by way of the eyes. So the eyes are very profoundly and inseparably connected from everything we do. It is the navigational system of the body, so every move you make as a human being is guided by your vision. So the understanding of vision is really a key piece in terms of understanding the behavior of the person, the nature of the person, the mental makeup, the intelligence of the person, and even looking at their consciousness. Because what we're really talking about is what it truly means to see. And you know that when people say, I see, it means I understand. So most people think that vision is something related to eyesight. But vision is inseparably connected to consciousness. So right now we're paying attention to each other. How do we know that? Because we're looking at each other. So the act of aiming the eyes, which occurs effortlessly, is actually the foundation of presence. That's why all the meditative practices have you focus on something. What the average person doesn't recognize is that whether the eyes are opened or the eyes are closed, when you're focusing on something, the eyes literally focus in the same way, both ways. So aiming of the eyes sets a situation where we can be present and attentive with the other. When the eyes are aimed, they're automatically focused. And so focusing has to do with understanding. That's why I said, I see means I understand. We say the only constant is change. The world is always moving. And so the eyes are in continual state of movement with the world. You could say that as the world moves, the eyes are continuously changing so that we can continuously be present with whatever is happening in each moment. And then you've got two eyes rather than one. So both of them are teaming on a continual level, and that gives us each a slightly different perspective, if you will, and that's what allows us to have three-dimensional vision. What's interesting about the teaming of the eyes is that it doesn't only give you three-dimensional vision, but it allows you to separate foreground from background. In other words, it's the body's prioritization system. It lets you immediately know what is calling to you. And that's a very, very important aspect that we'll get into,
Yeah.
because we need to start differentiating what's the difference between looking and seeing. So a lot of my work had to do initially with working with patients, teaching children, adults, athletes, and so on, how to begin to recognize how their vision works so that they could use their vision to their maximum potential as human beings.
Well, something happened with you personally that predicated all this, something with your own vision.
My own vision, yeah. I was a kid with a reading problem. I really didn't read as a child. It was difficult for me. I started reading and I'd fall asleep in a couple of minutes. And so school was difficult for me. I had excellent eyesight. The eye doctor said, oh, there's nothing wrong with this child's eyes. But getting through school was very, very difficult. When I entered college, within 10 days, I lost my eyesight. I was in the middle of a test. I looked up at the blackboard. The whole blackboard was blurry. It took a few minutes for it to clear up. I immediately went to the infirmary to go to the eye doctor to make sure I didn't have some sort of disease. And they said, oh, you're nearsighted, and they gave me glasses. Soon I found I couldn't see without the glasses. It was almost like I became addicted to the glasses.
I completely
You understand this?
Well, I remember that experience.
And it's interesting because when you first get the glasses, it makes things, it's not only clear, it makes things feel different. And so I remember going back to the doctor and saying, you know, I can see clearly, but something doesn't feel right. To which he said, don't worry, you'll get used to it. Well, what's interesting is you do get used to it. Your eyes keep deteriorating every 6 months or so after you get the glasses. What I noticed is my reading problem didn't change. So when I went into my optometric training, I barely got through the first 2 years. I mean, I really thought that I was going to be thrown out. When I entered my third year, which was the clinical part of my work, the first thing they did was examine you. And when they examine you, the student doctor said you need a new prescription, but your eyes are not working together well. And so, to make a long story short, I did some vision exercises that changed my whole life. And after doing these vision exercises, I went from a C student to being a Dean's Lit student almost every quarter until I graduated. And so when I went into practice...
This is enormous.
Yeah, it was a very profound experience for me.
Yeah.
When I went into practice in 1973, that was the focus of my work. I wanted to work with kids who had the same experience that I did. Kids that were bright, but couldn't do well in school and thought that there was something wrong with them because of that. And so that's what I did. I worked with thousands of children that were diagnosed with learning problems or brain difficulties, just couldn't get by in school. That's what I did for several years. In 1975, I was wearing probably my 9th pair of glasses at the time. And I couldn't see without my glasses. I could barely see the big E on the chart, which meant that I was legally blind without my glasses. I need to wear them in order to work, in order to play, in order to drive, and so on. In fact, my driver's license said I had to have the glasses in order to see. So I said, you know, I wonder if I can do some of these same vision exercises to improve my own eyesight. And so what I did is, rather than continually increasing my prescription, I started exercising my eyes and simultaneously kept reducing the prescription just a little bit at a time. Within about 8 or 9 months, I got out of glasses, but what precipitated getting out of glasses wasn't just the exercising that I did. One Sunday, I was meditating at home, which is something that I had started doing in 1971. And while I was in this state of meditation with my eyes closed, something happened that had never happened before. My eyes were closed, but I had a sense that I was observing myself in the room meditating. Now today we would say that was an out-of-body experience, but this is 1976. I'd never had an experience like this. I'd never read about an experience like this. I had no idea what was going on. What was interesting is that even though my eyes were closed, everything in the room was crystal clear. Not only crystal clear optically, but crystal clear in terms of I was almost in a state of awe. Like everything was clear. I had no questions.
I just want to understand something. Are you saying that your eyes were closed, but you were seeing in the room?
Yes. My eyes were closed, but I guess through the mind's eye or some way, I could see exactly where I was sitting in the room. And I could see it with perfect optical clarity, but there was another sense of clarity that I had. When I say that things were clear, there was a period there were no questions. Everything was clear. I don't know how to describe it beyond that. The other facet that was really fascinating for me is I couldn't tell from where I was seeing. It felt as though I was simultaneously perceiving myself from the front, from the back, from the sides, and from the top at the same time. Now, I don't know how to describe that. Today they would call it holographic seeing.
Yeah.
But at the time, I'd never heard of this term. I'd never had this experience. And when I came out of it and someone said, well, what did it feel like? I said, I felt as though I'd become the sky. Now, what was profound about it
And
is,
you weren't in an altered state of consciousness.
well, who knows where I was.
you weren't on, right.
Something had happened. I came out of the meditation.
Not chemically altered.
No, not chemically altered.
Right, okay.
When I opened my eyes from meditating, the clarity remained. I could see with total clarity. I didn't know what the heck had happened. This was certainly impossible based on all my classical training and my medical training. So I got in my car and I drove to my office to see what had actually occurred. What was immediately interesting is that I could see all the street signs, all the license plates, all the billboards without my glasses on. I got to my office, I sat in my exam chair, and I started to project all different eye charts that I'd never looked at before. And I could read all the letters on the chart, all the way down to the smallest line. And I said, wow. First of all, this is not supposed to happen. But if this did happen, I wonder what my prescription would be, because what I'd noticed for years is that my eyes worsen, the prescription got stronger. I'd seen that with thousands of patients as well. Maybe, since I'm seeing clearer, maybe my prescription became lessened, or maybe there's no prescription at all. So I put myself behind my phoropter, that instrument that the eye doctors use, projected a chart I'd never seen, and then started to examine myself. You know, which is better, 1 or 2?
Right.
And of course I got just as confused as the patients did when I did it for them. What was interesting is when I finished doing the exam, thinking that I would find no prescription on the instrument, I looked, and the prescription on the instrument was exactly what I was wearing in my glasses. In other words, I was seeing 300% better, 300% better with no glasses on, but the optical measurements of my eyes had not changed at all. And I had to take a look at that, and I said, wait a minute. If the optical measurements of my eyes hadn't changed, the prescription, and yet I'm seeing 300% better, then the seeing is happening from somewhere other than the eye. And that was the first time I realized that vision was occurring in a multiplicity of places. Not only in the eye and the brain, not only perhaps in the mind, but somewhere other than the mind. And so that started a whole period of experimentation, which I called an experiment on the workings of the mind. And for the next 4 years, I was in a continual state of experimenting with myself. And what I was looking at is there a button somewhere in the mind that if I can touch that button, my vision will open up? I will be able to see that change. Well, the interesting thing about that experience in 1976 is that I'm going to be 61 next month. It's now 2008. It's 32 years. I've never had a pair of glasses on my face since that day, and I see well at distance, and I see well up close.
This is a fantastic story, and what I'm wearing contacts now, but you wrote this book, Take Off Your Glasses and See. Yeah. What is it that, this happened in your experience, but what can happen for me, for someone else? Sometimes there's someone who has these, what I would call extraordinary experiences.
Yeah. Okay?
Is it replicatable? I don't know if that's a proper word, but how can
you replicate it?
Can you replicate it? Could I replicate that experience?
For some people, yes. It's not because the experience I had is not valid. Mm-hmm. It's because, this is just my because, I don't think that everything is available to everyone.
Aha.
For instance, my mother and my father are no longer living. My mother had cancer 4 times. When she died, she didn't have cancer. Now, most people wouldn't have that experience, but my mother had that experience.
Yeah.
Now, someone else may be an incredible artist. My mother couldn't paint, and neither can I. So I don't know what the maximum potential is for each human being.
Yeah.
I think that's an individualized thing. And so all we can do is try to find whatever that place is within each of us. And my sense is that something will open. But is that something going to be the same for you as for me? Probably not. But it may be something just as important.
Yeah.
It's just for you.
Yeah. This is something really I found very significant when we were talking the other day. And it's a real departure from what is commonly these days the secret and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There was a statement that you made, we can only be what we are, not what we want to be. I think that's very profound, and it's a departure from that.
Right.
Expand on that, because I think that's very significant. You were giving examples about flowers and trees, and you just touched on it a moment ago about how everything isn't the same for everybody. I think that's a big deal.
You know, sometimes I say, do we really change, or do we become just more accepting of who we've always been? I look at photographs of myself as a child, 4 or 5 years old. I look at myself as a young man, and I look at myself as a mature man with 2 grown-up children. Have I changed? Well, I don't have as much hair. The skin is a little bit more saggy than it used to be. Maybe I have a little bit more belly than I used to. The muscles are smaller. Certain things are more rounded in my nature. Maybe the edges that I used to have as a younger man have rounded out, sort of like a stone that falls in the river. But has my core changed? Has my nature changed? This is just my perception. Not at all. I'm the same person I've always been.
Yeah.
Just certain outside things change. It's sort of like, does a tree change?
Yeah.
Well, it gets taller, it gets more bark, maybe it loses certain leaves, but it's still an oak tree, or it's still a pine tree. The pine tree is not going to be an oak tree. It's always going to be a pine tree, but certain things about it, certain more superficial or outer things appear to change, but the core of that tree remains essentially the same. So from my perspective, there's certain things that change, that come and go, and then there's certain very core things that don't change at all.
Yeah.
You know, that at different points in life, with maturation, certain things all of a sudden become manifest, but they've always been there to some degree or another. So that's just my perception of it.
Well, one thing you were saying is it's very important to recognize our nature.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we were together, you had me close my eyes and go back to when I was a child. So this seems like a very important thing, to really recognize our nature. You have another one I'd like to hear more about, that were plugs or outlets.
Yeah. You know, I think the purpose of, or the value of recognizing one's nature is once you recognize what your design is, you know, the kind of tree, if you will, that you are. What goes hand in hand with that, from my experience, is acceptance. Once I realize who I am, not who the person is that I thought I should be or the rest of the world thought I should be, but exactly who I am. And I think we only get that through years of living and just recognizing we're still the same person that always was.
Yeah.
Once that happens, if we're very fortunate, we gradually become more and more unconditionally accepting with who we are. And the beauty of that is, when we accept it as it is, what used to be a problem sometimes dissolves instantaneously.
Yeah.
What we used to think was wrong with us or needed fixing or needed this or that, all of a sudden, those things may dissolve with the acceptance. And that's why I say, do we change, do we actually change, or do we just become more accepting of who we've always been? For me, I worked for years like everyone else, working on myself to be more present, to be this, to be that. And then I had a moment of grace when I felt that unconditional acceptance for the first time. It brought me to tears. And something has shifted since then. And one of the things that shifted is that yearning to be more is not there anymore. Now, it's happening on its own. You know, we say the only constant is change. We're always maturing and so on. But I don't have that old feeling of lack. I don't have that feeling that I had as a child of not being smart. Nor do I have the feeling of being smart. It's just, it is as it is kind of thing, you know? So for me, the knowing something about your nature leads automatically into a sense of acceptance. In terms of the plug and the outlet, the example that I was giving is that some people are continuously on the move, just like certain animals that moving very, very quickly. And certain animals, just like certain people, move very, very slowly. And what I've come to recognize after working with maybe 35,000, 40,000 people over the last 35, 36 years is that people have a certain nature. Some naturally move fast. Some, their engines seem to have 16 or 32 cylinders. Others, they move slowly. It's almost as though some are designed to go out and look for things, and some are designed to just wait and be found. And the value of that is that once you recognize what your nature is, then that old thing that we all experience, I mean, for me, I've been moving fast since I was an infant. I got up to walk at 6 months of age. That was unheard of, you know, 60 years ago. And I was actually walking shortly after that. But most of my life, people said, oh, you got to slow down. I wasn't designed to slow down. This is the way my system, it's like a cheetah. It moves quickly. And then there are other people who naturally move slow. And yet the world says, oh, no, you got to move faster. But that's their design. And it's not their design that way because that's part of the way the entire universe stays in balance. Everything has, it serves a purpose. Everything is a certain part of the universe's engine, if you will. And it has to work in harmony and so on. So for me, recognizing our nature is important. Are we one that's constantly moving? Are we one that has a tendency that just needs to wait until the world calls upon them? All of that is part and parcel with recognizing your nature, and leads or can lead to a possibility of a gradually expanding unconditionality about how we accept ourselves. And what's beautiful about that is, as I become more accepting of myself, there's a softening that happens and a greater acceptance of the world. And that doesn't mean that I feel accepting about everything that happens in the world. It means that I accept it when I have a yes for life, and it means that I also have a yes for my nose. So the unconditional acceptance is beautiful because it includes even those instances when we're not unconditionally accepting. It includes all of it. In other words, our humanity is included. Those times that we think we're on the track, and those times when we think we're off the track. Those times when the mind is empty, and even those moments when we think, oh, there's judgments going on. It includes, and the hands are big enough to hold all of that. And then something happens for us after that. We just relax into our own skin. How that happens, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Just by grace.
Yeah.
Just by grace.
Yeah. Well, as time goes on, and having done so many workshops and so many therapies, just like you were talking about yourself, and you know, and I see a lot of people here on Maui and everywhere, you know, just running from one thing to the next. What I found is that there's a Yiddish expression that you gave me the other day that nothing works.
Yeah, gar nicht helfen. Nothing works.
Gar nicht helfen. Yeah. And I have actually found that that's true.
I guess what I'm saying is that life's going to have its way with us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're like a feather in the wind, and the winds of life are moving. That doesn't mean that we're a victim.
Yeah.
It means that we are divinely cared for.
Mm-hmm.
It means that the intelligence that grows the flowers and the trees and the animals is also breathing us. In fact, we don't even breathe on our own. Something is breathing us. Something is moving us. I mentioned to you the little story about my daughter and I when we were having a conversation out on my lanai, and she wanted to share with me something that had happened the day before and find out had she made the right choice. And when she asked me, something grabbed my attention out to the right, and I found that my eyes and my head just looked to the right, and there was this big tree moving back and forth, and I just had this revelation. And I said, Gina, do you see that? And she said, what do you mean, Dad, the tree? And I said, yes. I said, what do you notice? She says, it's swaying back and forth. And I said, now, if you didn't know that an invisible force called wind existed, you might actually think that the tree was moving itself. But now that you know that something exists called wind, even though you can't see the wind, you know that it's the wind that's animating the tree, the movement of the tree. I said, what do you think's moving the wind? She looked at me. I said, something even more invisible, right? I said, you know, each day as human beings, we moving around the world, and we see other humans appearing to be moving, and we forget the invisible wind. We get the impression that they're making things happen, that they're the ones that are creating the movement. And we forget that the only constant is change. Movement is continual, but there's something animating the movement, and it's not us. It's the same thing that's breathing us. Once we gain a respect for that, we begin to understand something about our nature. We begin to understand even something about seeing. One of my big discoveries with seeing and recognizing that it wasn't happening in the eye is for many years I thought, the seeing is happening in the mind. That's why we call it the mind's eye. So I was trying to create change by creating shifts in the mind. But for years I tried to quiet the mind. I would meditate, and boy, seemingly everything would get quiet till I opened my eyes. Then it would start chattering again. And my idea was, how do I take this state in meditation and bring it into the world? And so I took my 20-minute meditation and I broke it into 20 one-minute meditations, and then 40 30-second meditations, and 80 15-second meditations. And I found that I could close my eyes and drop into that state. And then I started meditating while I was driving with the eyes open, trying to take that same feeling into my everyday life. And I began to realize something about this seeing mechanism. As I started to integrate my meditation so that my life became the meditation, it wasn't that I achieved that quietude and peace while I was sitting in my room, but how could that meditation be inseparably connected with everything I did? How I washed the dishes, how I made my bed, how I paid my bills, how I returned my phone calls. And then I realized that the world had a timing about it. things came into our awareness at certain times, and I began to realize that isn't by accident. That's the prioritization of the universe's intelligence. There's a reason why things enter our awareness at a certain moment. Now, I got this 30-something years ago when my children were small, and I noticed that they would leave their toys everywhere. I would tell them to pick up their toys. It would work for about 5 minutes, and then they would leave them again. And then I realized, wow, I can't get them to do that. Maybe I can use this experience for something different. And so what I said is anything that enters my awareness is looking for me.
Let's hold that thought, because I want to, this is a two-part show. So I want to come right back to that. Hold on to that, and we're going to come back to that in the next segment.
Great.
Okay, hold that thought. Okay, y'all, that's it for this episode of Life on Maui. This is part 1. We're going to continue in a part 2 segment of this show. So I want to thank Serendipity Maui for the wardrobe tonight, Serendipity Maui. And thank you, Jacob, for this wonderful part of the interview. And come back next time for part 2. And until next time, aloha.
Call me crazy, but I'm never